Tonight on KQED Newsroom, California Congressmember Adam Schiff responds to the conflict in Ukraine and new U.S. sanctions against Russia. Also, some lawmakers want California to accept cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin for tax payments and more. We speak with State Senator Sidney Kamlager, who's pressing for that change. And who's for and against Governor Newsom's new gas relief package? Our panel of reporters analyze the week's big stories. Coming to you from KQED headquarters in San Francisco, this Friday, March 25th, 2022. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Priya David Clemens. It has now been 1 month and a day since Russian forces first invaded Ukraine. The White House has announced that America will take in 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. 3.5 million Ukrainians have fled their homes already in this war. This week, President Biden traveled to Europe for emergency summits with other world leaders. He announced plans to ship liquefied natural gas to Europe to reduce dependence on Russian oil and gas. He also announced further sanctions on Russia. Joining us now in studio to discuss the war is the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressmember Adam Schiff. Representative Schiff, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you.
So, difficult times. This week, your House Intelligence Committee sent a bipartisan letter to the Director of National Intelligence. And in that letter, you encouraged her to, one, continue providing intelligence to Ukraine and its allies, but you also asked for a declassification of information, quote, related to Russia's planned or actual war crimes or atrocities. What are you hoping for in that declassified information?
The administration has used intelligence declassification in really important ways. First, by disclosing intelligence before the war to put Ukraine and the rest of the world on notice of what the Russians were planning. That helped us build support for sanctions. And then disclosing intelligence about Russian false flag operations, their potential use of chemical weapons. Also told the Russians, we know what you're planning. And finally now, to use our intelligence to help build the case on war crimes could be another really important use. If we can declassify information showing the deliberate attack of civilians, then some of these war criminals can be held accountable.
And so to that, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said this week that the government, the U.S. government, has now determined that some members of the Russian military have committed war crimes. What does that designation mean?
Well, it means that they can be held personally liable by an international criminal court or other tribunal. It would expose them to sanctions, for example, under the Magnitsky Act, where they can face financial sanctions, travel sanctions, and other costs of their war crimes. And ultimately, if the evidence goes back to Putin ordering indiscriminate bombing and other war crimes, he can also be held responsible.
What do you think of that? Do you think that President Vladimir Putin has committed war crimes?
I do. I think he's a war criminal and has blood on his hands. No one is more responsible for what's going on in Ukraine than he is. This is just naked aggression on his part, his desire to be the next Peter the Great. And the fact is that he has just no respect for human life.
There's also now very credible evidence from the intelligence community that Russians may be planning to use chemical weapons in this war against Ukraine. And President Joe Biden said this week that if that happens, that the U.S. would respond in kind. And I'm curious about your thoughts on this, about the U.S. perhaps not directly deploying chemical weapons ourselves, but assisting another country to engage in chemical warfare. Do you have any qualms about that?
Well, I heard the president make those remarks, and my immediate reaction was, I'm sure that he doesn't mean that we're going to respond with the use of chemical weapons or by supporting Ukraine's use of chemical weapons, which it doesn't possess to begin with. I think what he means is we'll respond proportionately. That is, we'll figure out in what other way, in a very severe terms, that we can help Ukraine respond, that we can respond with economic and other sanctions. And The president now is discussing with NATO what those repercussions should be. The Russians have used chemical weapons in peacetime. They poisoned people on foreign soil. They assisted Bashar al-Assad when he used chemical weapons. They're obviously not averse to doing it, and tragically, we have to be prepared.
Apart from that sort of warfare, what sort of assistance should we still be offering? President Biden has said over and over again that we're not going to be helping to enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine. We had former Senator Barbara Boxer on the show not long ago, and she said, you know, if we put U.S. military boots on the ground in Ukraine, we're essentially going into World War III. So beyond the humanitarian assistance that we've offered so far, beyond the military assistance that we've offered so far, what else could America still be doing?
I think we can do a lot more of what we have been doing. So we've been providing anti-tank and anti-armored vehicle munitions like the Javelins. We've been providing anti-aircraft weapons and systems. We've started providing armed drones. Those can be very effective. What the Ukrainians most need are things that they don't need to be extensively trained on, that they can make immediate use of. I would still love to see them get those Polish MiGs. But I think the president is right to draw the line on a no-fly zone, because I think that would get us into a shooting war with Russia. In order to impose a no-fly zone, we'd have to shoot down Russian aircraft. We'd have to shoot down air defense systems within Russia, and that would be a dramatic escalation.
I know you've also spent some time in the Ukraine yourself, so I'm sure personally this is hard to see on an extra level.
It is. I've been there a couple of times. I was there during their Revolution of Dignity, the Orange Revolution, when they were seeking to throw out a pro-Kremlin autocrat and ultimately succeeded. I have a lot of respect for the Ukrainian people.
So turning to politics here, recently the Washington Post reported that House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said he would strip you of your post as chair of the House Intelligence Committee should the Republicans regain a majority in the midterms. He's accused you of politicizing the panel. I am guessing you have a thing or two to say about that.
Yes, that's pretty rich coming from the guy who appointed Devin Nunes to the panel and also pushed for the creation of a Benghazi Select Committee because he said he wanted to take down Hillary's numbers, poll numbers that is. There's no one who's, I think, been more destructively partisan political than Kevin McCarthy. But what he's doing when he threatens to remove me from the Intel Committee is seeking to appease the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Paul Gosars, who for good reason had their committees stripped aside for their support of white nationalism, for their advocacy and glorification of violence against other members of Congress. This is his way of saying, I'm going to do payback for you.
Sort of a tit for tat.
Yes, and also it reflects how weak a hold he has on the Republican conference, that he has to do the bidding of his most extreme members. Let's
turn to another piece of news you made. You took aim this week at the Citizens United decision. So this was back in 2010, a Supreme Court case in which the justices ruled that corporations and unions were permitted to give unlimited campaign contributions to run campaigns because it was an expression of free speech. But that has led to a lot of money sloshing around in the system over the last several years. Your amendment would essentially overturn Citizens United in that decision. Could you tell us about the amendment and what it would do?
As you say, it would do a couple things. It would overturn Citizens United, but it would go back to a case really 3 or 4 decades ago, a post-Watergate case where the Supreme Court struck down Watergate reforms that limited independent expenditures. Citizens United made that far worse. So this would overturn that line of decisions to allow Congress once again to put limits on expenditures of money, get rid of all the dark money, big corporate spending in elections. I think it's probably the most important constitutional reform we can have is attacking that pollution of our campaign system.
Congressmember Adam Schiff, thank you for joining us here in studio today.
Pleasure.
What if you could pay for your taxes using a new form of currency, digital money, cryptocurrency? The idea may seem far-fetched, but it could be closer than you think. Colorado Governor Jared Polis says his state will begin to accept crypto payments for state taxes and fees as early as this summer. The concept is also being introduced in the California state legislature. State Senator Sidney Kamlager has introduced a bill which would allow state agencies like the DMV to take cryptocurrency as payment. Senator Kamlager joins us now. Senator, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Exciting to be here.
We're glad to have you. Cryptocurrency has been gaining traction very quickly. We hear that buzzword so often, but so many of us still don't really understand what it is and how it works. So could you give us a quick overview?
Sure. Well, I want to tell people you should not be afraid of digital currency. You should be embracing digital currency because digital currency is money. It is just money that is stored or exchanged using computer systems. That's all it is.
And it is outside the traditional banking system as well. Tell us about your bill that you've proposed. At this point, it has not gone to any committees, so it's still got a long way to go before it reaches the governor's desk and potentially gets signed into the law. But why did you introduce it and what would it do?
Well, you're right. We are going to cross our fingers that this bill gets to the finish line. And SB 1275 is part of my legislative package this year that focuses on economic justice and how do we bring folks from the margins to the center. And one way to do that is to make wealth building more democratic and more accessible. And this is what this bill would do. It simply says that if you are a Californian and you have bills to pay to the state of California, that you can use digital currency to do so.
What is this piece of equity? Let's dive into that a little bit more. When you think of cryptocurrency, you think of tech, you often think of people who have a lot of wealth already. Why do you see this as an issue of equity?
That is a great question, and also an assumption that I had too, and it was debunked for me by a friend of mine. So 63 million Americans across this country are either unbanked or unbanked, and millions of those folks live in California. We are thinking that this is an opportunity for venture capitalists and for folks who are uber rich to play in this new space. But really, most of the folks who are investing or who own cryptocurrency are making less than $100,000. They tend to be unbanked or underbanked. They tend to be using alternate financial services like, payday loans or money cashing places. And those systems cost them money to make transactions, to send money, to hold on to money, to get money. And so many of these folks are now entering into the space of cryptocurrency. We know that 44% of folks who are investing in digital currency are not white. We know that there is a growing population of Black and Latino consumers and investors in this space. It is very enticing and exciting for folks who feel like they have been marginalized or who have been kept out of the traditional lending space.
Let's turn to some of the concerns that people have when it comes to crypto, in particular security issues. In fact, one of your introductions to crypto was partly because of a ransomware attack. Could you tell us about that time?
Yes. So I was on the board of the Los Angeles Community College District, and we got hacked. The Russians hacked into our system and took all of the data that belonged to our students. And so we had to engage in negotiations to get this data back using Bitcoin. And so my first introduction to this was talking to the FBI about what is this? And I thought, it's like the dark web. It's a scary space with shady characters. But I have to say, my last sort of connection to it was having dinner with a Latina friend of mine who said she had been researching digital currency and had begun to invest in it for 5 years now. And she was using this money to open up a business. And just last month, that's exactly what she did.
So you're seeing both the dark side of it and, potentially the light here.
Yes, but I have to say that there's, there are positives and negatives to regular American currency. There are positives and negatives to credit card transactions. We are living in an age where nothing is 100% secure. So I think it would be disingenuous to place all of those fears on digital currency. We have an opportunity to lead as the state of California, or to at least be a part of the conversation, and to hopefully drive some of the discussions that are happening at the federal level.
All right, well, there are a couple of concerns about crypto that are specific to this form of money. One, that cryptocurrency isn't just a standard unit. There are many types and many valuations which go up and down. So that leads to concerns about the stability of these various forms of money. And then separately, there's also the restriction that states, we can't make our own money. That's a function of the federal government. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are not what's called legal tender. So tell us how these issues would be addressed through your bill or through working out the operations of it.
Yeah, so you're right. The federal government is the only one that can decide legal tender for currency, and this bill would not do so. This bill is also agnostic as it relates to the kind of cryptocurrency that can be used, because we know that there are a number of different products out there, and we are not trying to be a stamp of approval for one particular product. So I want to say that this is presenting a building block. This is not about full implementation or integration of digital currency into the state of California. And we do have an opportunity to think about contracting with third-party vendors who could convert cryptocurrency into dollars. And there's something called stable coin that is actually pegged to the US dollar that would allow you to do that. And the bill is not specific to the volatility of cryptocurrency. That is not what this bill is about. This bill is just about making payments. So obviously at the time you are making a payment, the value of that cryptocurrency would stabilize and be stopped, because you would then be transferring it over or converting it over to US dollars to make your payments. So, but yes, to your point, these are discussions that are happening at the federal level. I think they're trying to figure out the regulatory jurisdiction for this. Is it the SEC? Is it some other agency? And for, a national discussion, we probably have to continue to have those kinds of deeper dives.
We're all sort of stumbling our way forward and working out how to do this, starting to walk, to catch up with this technology that's already out there. All right, I want to turn to another subject for our last question here. We've all been watching the confirmation hearings for Supreme Court nominee Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, obviously a history-making moment. What has it been like for you to watch as a fellow female Black leader?
Well, I have to say I've been turning the TV on when I've been in my office waiting to go to committee, and I would much rather watch her confirmation hearings than the committee, because it's historic. I was, in shock and frustrated and disgusted by how she was treated by Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Ted Cruz, and just humbled and feeling joyous when Senator Cory Booker reminded her and the rest of the world that she would be confirmed as the next justice on the Supreme Court. Seeing her speak in front of, with her daughter behind her and her husband, both beaming with pride about this amazing Black woman who is incredibly qualified, who will sit on the bench and counter the craziness that is Clarence Thomas. I cannot wait for her to be confirmed.
All right, State Senator Sydney Kamlager, thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Governor Gavin Newsom has announced a relief package to offset gas prices that have been rising over the past several weeks.
So today we're announcing a $9 billion tax refund to tens of millions of Californians, $400 for each registered vehicle that an individual owns, up to 2 vehicles.
His plan also includes grants and reduced fares for public transit users. The proposal still needs to be approved by the legislature. If it passes, Californians could see payments as early as July. Joining me now with more analysis of this week's big stories, our senior editor of KQED's Silicon Valley News Desk, Rachel Myrow. Hi, Rachel.
Hi.
And California politics reporter for Politico, Jeremy B. White. Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, Priya.
So, Jeremy, why don't you kick us off here? Let's talk about these gas tax payments, or these gas payments, and how they're being received right now.
I think there is no doubt that California is going to offer some form of relief to residents for high gas prices. The legislature is asking for it. The governor is asking for it. The question is really just, what are those payments going to look like? So the governor's plan is $400 payments per vehicle, up to 2 vehicles per person. He is additionally calling to suspend the gas tax, and he wants to target it to everyone, which is to say it wouldn't be tailored to lower income Californians. That differs pretty markedly in a few respects from what legislative leaders asked for. They do want an income cap. They want it to go to only people making less than $250,000 a household, and their plan was tied to individuals rather than to vehicles. And so I think it's clear that there's still some room for negotiation between legislative leaders and the governor as to what exactly this relief looks like.
What are the Republicans in the legislature saying about this proposal? Do they like it? Generally, you would think they'd be in favor of giving these sorts of rebates.
It's interesting because there is an aspect of the governor's plan that is similar to what the Republicans have been calling for, which is namely freezing the gas tax. The Republicans are trying to do that immediately. They keep trying to force votes on that unsuccessfully. And in a lot of ways, this really is something that allows them to reap some political benefit and talk up how Democrats keep not taking these opportunities to provide immediate relief. They're going to make voters wait months. And so I think Republicans clearly see some political gain in really pummeling the majority party on this, even as it looks very likely that some form of relief is going to be forthcoming.
And that's coming soon. I also thought it was interesting that there could be several months of no payments at all on public transit. So we'll see where we end up with that. But I thought that was fascinating. I'm going to turn to you, Rachel. I love when you're here because I get caught up in all of the tech news. You know, thank you for bringing that information to us. So last night there was this government regulation in Europe, and it's new regulation on tech companies, many of which, as we know, are based here in California, in the Bay Area. This is called the Digital Markets Act. And I want to actually read, I liked how one of the top European digital officers described it. Thierry Britton said, "Faced with big online platforms behaving like they were too big to care, Europe has put its foot down. We are putting an end to the so-called Wild West dominating our information space. We're making a new framework that can be a reference for democracies worldwide." So big goals, big intention here. What is this framework, and is it going to impact us here?
It will indeed, and it's interesting to note that once again, European regulators are stepping out ahead of Washington, D.C., where we've seen gridlock and just a great deal of confusion and disagreement as to what antitrust regulation should look like, coming from both lawmakers and coming from regulators here in Washington, D.C. So some of the same territory that they've been talking about, European regulators have come to decisions about, and you can just hear the scrambling going on in Silicon Valley right now between these armies of political lobbyists and lawyers. They're going to have to move to respond to the European moves, and quite possibly other countries around the world will follow suit.
We also had a very interesting conversation just before you came on with State Senator Sydney Kamlager. And she is introducing a bill here in California in which people could pay for their taxes and other state services using cryptocurrency. So I'm curious about your take on that, first of all.
Well, it's a good stop for the youth vote because there are a lot of young Americans who have bought into the big surge in cryptocurrencies. And it's something that we have seen done in other parts of the world, El Salvador, Colorado. But, you know, some open questions here. I mean, I'm not sure how many Americans actually treat cryptocurrency as a currency, more like an investment. And it's a super volatile investment. So I don't know.
All right. Well, picking up on that, we love to have people from our community join us on Twitter and ask us questions. And one of them I thought had a really interesting thought, which is if we're going to accept crypto and we're looking at other currencies, why not the pound or the euro or the yen, right? So interesting and a lot to be figured out there. You know, State Senator Kamlager actually hasn't been in office that long, but she is already running for Congress now. She is running for Karen Bass's vacated seat, and she's got the entire Democratic political machinery behind her. Senator Padilla has endorsed her, Emily's List. I mean, the list kind of goes on. Let's turn to Karen Bass for a second, right? Because she left Congress in order to run for LA mayor. And this week we saw the LA mayor's candidates, the candidates for mayor there, all come together on the debate stage. Jeremy, catch us up. We really haven't talked that much about the LA mayor's race yet. Who's in it and what's the jockeying looking like?
So as you mentioned, Congresswoman Karen Bass, I think widely perceived to be the front runner, somebody who has a lot of name ID, which I think was boosted by her being on the vice presidential shortlist for a little while there. She is vying with city council members Joe Buscaino and Kevin De Leon, the city attorney Mike Fuhrer. But I would say the candidate who has really injected the biggest variable in this race since the beginning is Rick Caruso, a wealthy Los Angeles developer who looks poised to spend a lot of money to really create an opening for himself by channeling the concerns of voters about crime and homelessness in particular, two issues that in LA, as in a lot of other parts of the state, are really top of mind for voters.
And that's something we could well see in Los Angeles. I'm thinking of the 8-year term as LA mayor that Richard Riordan enjoyed. And he was somebody who came in from the outside, Los Angeles County, Los Angeles City, I should say, very democratic, but sometimes a Republican who says, hey, I can turn this situation around, has an appeal for people.
All right. Well, we'll have to leave it there and keep watching it as we go. Rachel Myra with KQED, Jeremy B. White with Politico. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Tonight's look at something beautiful is Happy Hollow, a small zoo with an amusement park featuring rides for younger children in San Jose. How sweet. That's the end of our show for tonight. I'll be off next week, and KQED's Scott Schaefer will be hosting instead. Tune in for a special conversation between Matt Haney and David Campos, who are running against each other for a seat in the Assembly. You can find KQED Newsroom online, or you can email us at knr@kqed.org. And you can reach me on social media at Priya D. Clemens. We'll see you right back here next Friday night. Have a great weekend.